Hi everybody and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about solving factored equations, specifically using the zero product property. So your goal after watching today's video will be able to solve quadratic equations using factoring, and more specifically the zero product property. So if you're looking at this now and you're like, Mr. R, like what does it even mean to solve a quadratic? Why is this a life skill I'm ever going to need to see? Well, there are a lot of things that are modeled by quadratic motion, and it's going to be really important in a lot of different ways to be able to solve them. So maybe a first example, the flight of a basketball. That is quadratic motion. So you can see in this video, we have somebody shooting the basketball. It goes up in a perfect arc, and then we can predict where it goes down. Now, this might be a powerful skill, especially if you're either watching a game or you are helping someone work on their shot or their form, and you want them to ultimately, and if we're looking at this picture, we want them to get it in the hoop right there. So solving quadratics can solve for a given spot. So we can solve, where is the ball going to hit the ground? Or maybe, if the height is 10, where is the ball's position going to be when the height is 10? Will it be actually going into the net? So with that being said, not only applies to basketball, but a lot of different flights, maybe even airplanes. Again, different types of things we can model using this. So this actually is a really applicable skill. I think, honestly, of the ones we're going to do this year, it's going to come up pretty frequently and one of the best, I think, applications to daily life. So with that being said, let's jump in here. Our definition is the zero product property. This is also commonly referred to as ZPP. And for this, it's just basically saying, in the most simple terms, if you multiply anything by 0, the answer is 0. And we've done this a few times in class before, but the idea is, again, 4 times 0 just gives us 0. If you have, 7 times 0, again, it's just 0. You can do a variable, x times 0 is just 0. But we can apply this to more complex things. You could do, 0 times x plus 3. Again, that still just equals 0. 0 times anything, doesn't matter how big, complex, small it is, will just be 0. If you're like, well, what does this apply to? How are we going to, use this today? If you're solving something like x times x minus 2, and you need it to equal 0, that's your goal, is for all of this to equal 0, well, what this is basically telling us is that this can be 0, or this can be 0, because 0 times x minus 2 does equal 0, but also x times 0 for the x minus 2, that also equals 0 for us as well. So we're basically using this property to manipulate equations so that we're able to, again, solve for 0. So first of all, we know that one value for x can just be 0. Again, 0 times anything is 0. But the more tricky part is if you have multiple terms inside of parentheses, that all of that needs to equal 0. So all of this needs to equal 0 to multiply it by x. Multiply it by the first term to get 0. So we'll have to do something like x minus 2. Again, all of it needs to equal 0. So let's solve for that. And we'll plug in x equals 2. So that is our second solution. And if we look at this here, if you do plug in 2 there, 2 minus 2 is 0. So that would get us x times 0, which that would also equal 0. So that's how we look at solutions today, is we're looking for, again, trying to get something that's set equal to 0. That way when we multiply it, it gives us the answer that we're looking for. And when we do that, we can bring ourselves back to, I was trying to slide to our next screen here, we can bring ourselves back to here with our basketball. When it's set equal to 0, we can find the point that we're looking for. We can, set it equal to the ground, or we can find that 10-foot tall hoop. But again, if it's set equal to 0, we can use that zero product property. That's going to be very powerful for solving. So let's take a look. First things first. Number 1. This is all set equal to 0. So we're trying to find a value on this side that is also equal to 0. Well, what are we going to do? Well, trust your instincts. You see x squared, 10x, and 16, and immediately you should probably be thinking at this point, box. And if you're doing that, you're exactly right. That's exactly what you should be doing. So x and x here, list out our factors as 16. I got 16 and 1, 8 and 2, 4 and 4. Our sign is positive. So we're going to see we have 17, 10, and 8 to choose from. Well, we like 10. So we know our edges are going to be 8 and 2. And again, always checking. Still using those same steps. 8 and 2 get us 10. 8 times 2 gets us 16. So we're happy. So this factored form is now, I'm going to put this over here for us, x plus 8 times x plus 2. So the part that we underlined here is x plus 8 times x plus 2. Well, it still equals 0. And this is where the zero product property comes in. This is what we're learning today comes in. We can take either of these things, set them equal to 0, and that'll give us a solution for x. So let's start off. X plus 2, set that equal to 0. X equals negative 2. Okay, well, if we plug that in, we're going to get negative 2 plus positive 2, and that equals 0. And 0 times anything gets us 0. So again, we plug it in for both terms, we'll get 6 times 0, 6 times 0 is 0. That is a solution. Well, our second solution here, take our first term, x plus 8, set that equal to 0. Get x equals negative 8. And again, when we look here, we plug in negative 8. 0 is our first term. Negative 6 this time is our second term. 0 times negative 6 is still 0. So this is the fully solved solution for factoring quadratic. We just solve for its zeros. Okay, well, let's bring it to the next step. If we look at our second equation here, there's an equal sign in the middle. That's different. Right over here, the equal sign is all the way at the end. It was equal to 0. This one isn't equal to 0. So this is that example of that quadratic equation where it's set equal to something other than 0. So maybe in the case of what we are looking at with the basketball hoop, we set it equal to 10 because that's the height of the hoop. Well, that's fine, but in order to solve it, we do need it to be equal to 0. So we're not going to change anything about this. It's still equal to negative 18, but if we add 18 to both sides, what we're going to see is now we're able to solve because it's set equal to 0. So we didn't change anything about this. We're still solving for that same point as we were before. We're just manipulating this a little bit, keeping it balanced. Again, adding the same thing to both sides. But by doing that, we can use our same framework as we did before with our box, with factoring out 18, and then eventually with getting the two equations that we had equal to 0 to find x equals something. Again, setting both of those equal to 0 to get x equals something. So it's your job for the remaining, I think there's 5 questions here, to solve them. To make sure first that they are set equal to 0, but after you do that, to factor them using the box method, set them equal to 0, and solve for x. So that's our skill for today. So using the zero product property, finding, again, the solutions to these quadratics, now taking it a step further, and we'll be in good shape. As always, any questions, feel free to reach out, and I will see you all in Teams very soon. Thanks for